When I first moved to London, I remember thinking I had made the easiest international move possible. Same language, mostly the same TV shows, familiar brands, and people who, at least in my imagination, all sounded like characters from movies I'd watched growing up. I honestly expected a few different words, a couple of funny accents, maybe more tea than coffee, and that would be about it. Instead, within my first week, I found myself questioning everything from how people stood on escalators to why an electrical outlet seemed to have trust issues. The strange part wasn't that Britain was different. It was that it looked so familiar that every tiny difference caught me completely off guard. Before we dive in, hit subscribe. If you love exploring Britain through an American's eyes and to help me complete the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I used to question at videos about British culture, people apologizing when someone else bumped into them, long, silent queues where nobody even looked impatient, entire conversations about the weather that somehow lasted longer than actual conversations about life, a pub packed with grandparents, families, dogs, and people solving quiz questions on a Tuesday night, restaurant bills where tipping suddenly became optional, apartment buildings where the first floor wasn't actually the first floor. I remember thinking, this can't possibly be real. 2 years later, I have some slightly embarrassing news. Not only was it real, but I've accidentally become one of those people. And somewhere along the way, the habits I thought were completely ridiculous started making perfect sense. The funny thing is that Britain never asked me to change. Nobody sat me down with a handbook titled, "Congratulations, you're British now." There wasn't a cultural orientation class explaining when to say cheers, how many times you're allowed to apologize in a single conversation, or why everyone seems to instinctively know where an invisible queue begins. Instead, the country just kept quietly doing what it had always done, and I slowly adjusted without even realizing it. Looking back, that's probably the most surprising part of living here. Culture doesn't usually announce itself. It whispers. It shows up in tiny moments that seem insignificant on their own, but together they completely reshape how you experience everyday life. I think one reason Americans get caught off guard is because Britain gives us a false sense of confidence. If I had moved to Japan or Brazil, I would have expected culture shock from the moment I landed. Different language, different customs, different everything. My brain would have been prepared to learn. Britain, though, tricks you. Everyone speaks English, the street signs are readable, and half the stores seem strangely familiar. It feels like you've arrived in a parallel universe where someone copied America almost perfectly, but changed hundreds of tiny details just to see if anyone would notice. And trust me, you notice. One of my first grocery trips is still burned into my memory. I confidently walked into the supermarket expecting it to be the easiest task of my day. 20 minutes later, I was wandering around holding a shopping basket full of items whose names I recognized, but whose meanings I suddenly didn't trust. Chips weren't chips. Biscuits weren't always what I expected. The milk was in a different section than I anticipated. Even the refrigerators seemed smaller, as if they were quietly encouraging me not to buy enough food to survive an apocalypse. Nothing was dramatically different, but everything was just different enough to make me feel like I'd skipped one page in an instruction manual that everyone else had already read. If you're enjoying this journey so far, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and left a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more curious people who love these cultural deep dives. Then there were the apartment buildings. On one of my first days, someone told me they lived on the first floor, so naturally I walked into the building and looked for a door at street level. After wandering around looking increasingly confused, I realized that what I called the first floor was the ground floor, and the first floor was actually one level above me. It sounds like such a tiny thing, but after getting lost because of it more than once, I started wondering how many everyday assumptions I had brought with me without ever questioning them. Apparently, floor numbering was one of them. Who knew your sense of direction could be defeated by vocabulary? The same thing happened with electrical outlets. I plugged in my laptop, walked away feeling productive, and came back to discover it hadn't charged at all. For a brief moment, I genuinely thought I'd broken something. Then someone casually reached over, flipped the tiny switch next to the socket, and suddenly everything worked. They looked at me with the same expression you'd give someone who forgot to turn on a lamp before complaining that the room was dark. That little switch, which had seemed so unnecessary to me, was completely normal to everyone else. It became another reminder that the things we call common sense are often just habits we've inherited from wherever we grew up. Those little surprises kept piling up. Some were funny, some were mildly frustrating, but together they created this strange feeling that psychologists sometimes describe as low-level culture fatigue. It wasn't one giant obstacle, it was hundreds of tiny mental adjustments every single day. Every time I thought I understood how something worked, Britain gently introduced another unwritten rule. Oddly enough, that wasn't exhausting because the country was difficult. It was exhausting because it looked like it shouldn't be. My brain kept expecting America with a different accent, but London kept reminding me that sharing a language doesn't mean sharing the same operating system. Eventually, I realized that the things Americans often call weird aren't random quirks at all. They're clues. Every odd habit points to a deeper story about history, geography, or the way a society has learned to live together. The switch plug tells you something about safety. The smaller fridge hints at different shopping habits. The floor numbering reflects an entirely different convention that nobody here even thinks about anymore. And once I started asking why, instead of simply laughing at what looked unusual, Britain became much more interesting than I had expected. The country wasn't being strange for the sake of it. It was quietly revealing a completely different philosophy of everyday life. But there was one British habit that confused me more than all the others combined. At first, I honestly thought it was inefficient, unnecessary, and maybe even a little obsessive. Today, it's the very habit I find myself defending whenever friends from America come to visit. I never imagined something so ordinary could completely change the way I thought about an entire culture, but that's exactly what happened. And strangely enough, it all started with standing in line. The habit that completely changed how I viewed Britain wasn't the food, the accents, or even the weather. It was standing in line. I know that sounds incredibly dramatic because at the end of the day, we're talking about queues, people waiting. That's it. But during my first few weeks in London, I kept noticing something that felt almost impossible. Hundreds of complete strangers somehow knew exactly whose turn it was, without anyone saying a word. There weren't ropes guiding people. There usually wasn't an employee giving instructions. Yet everyone instinctively understood where the line began, where it ended, and who had arrived first. It felt less like waiting and more like watching a silent dance where everyone somehow already knew the choreography. Unfortunately, I learned this the embarrassing way. One morning I stopped at a bakery before work, saw what looked like a crowd milling around the counter, and confidently walked toward what I thought was the ordering area. The room suddenly became quiet. Nobody shouted at me. Nobody complained. In fact, nobody even looked particularly angry. A woman simply smiled and said, "I think the queue starts back there." It was probably the politest correction I've ever received, but somehow it felt even more effective because of that. I apologized about 6 different times, walked to the back of the line, and spent the next 5 minutes wishing I could become invisible. In America, someone might have argued about whether there even was a line here. There was never any debate. I was the one who had misunderstood the unwritten rule. That's when I started paying attention. The queue wasn't just for coffee shops. It was everywhere. Bus stops, pharmacies, museums, food markets, train stations, even temporary pop-up stalls at local events. The fascinating part wasn't that people waited their turn. Americans do that too. The difference was how deeply the idea seemed woven into everyday life. Cutting in line wasn't just considered rude. It almost felt like breaking an invisible social contract. Nobody needed signs reminding people what to do because everyone already believed the system worked best when everyone played by the same rules. The more I watched, the more I realized the queue wasn't really about saving time. Honestly, it's probably not the fastest way to move people. It was about something else entirely. Fairness. The person who arrived first gets served first. No exceptions because you're louder, richer, more confident, or simply better at squeezing through a crowd. There's something oddly comforting about that. For those few minutes, everyone is equal. Your place isn't determined by status. It's determined by when you showed up. After living here for a while, I found myself relaxing in situations where I normally would have felt stressed. I didn't have to compete for attention because I trusted the line to remember my place. That obsession with fairness has deep historical roots. Britain has spent centuries developing institutions that relied on rules being followed consistently, from local markets to public services. During the Second World War, rationing became part of everyday life, and orderly queues helped distribute limited supplies as fairly as possible. Millions of people learned that waiting your turn wasn't just polite. It was essential for keeping society functioning during incredibly difficult times. Of course, modern Britain isn't living under wartime rationing anymore, but habits built over generations have a funny way of sticking around. What began as practical necessity gradually became part of the national character. Once, I noticed the logic behind queuing. I started seeing similar invisible rules everywhere else, especially on public transport. If you've ever ridden the London Underground during rush hour, you'll know it's busy enough to test anyone's patience. Yet somehow, there's a rhythm to it. People stand on the right side of escalators and leave the left side open for anyone walking. The first time I ignored that rule, it wasn't intentional. I was simply admiring the station architecture when a calm voice behind me said, "Excuse me." I stepped aside, and suddenly an entire stream of commuters flowed past like water, finding an open channel. It was such a simple system, but it kept thousands of people moving every hour. The tube itself has its own language that nobody officially teaches you. People usually let passengers get off before trying to squeeze on. Conversations are quieter than I expected. Eye contact is brief. If someone accidentally brushes against you, there's almost always a quick sorry, even when nobody was really at fault. Coming from the United States, where chatting with strangers can happen pretty naturally, the silence initially felt cold. I remember wondering if everyone was upset or simply having a terrible morning. Eventually, I realized the opposite was true. The quiet wasn't unfriendly. It was respectful. In a city where millions of people constantly share limited space, giving each other a little mental breathing room is actually a form of kindness. That's probably the biggest lesson I learned from Britain's invisible rules. They aren't written down because they don't need to be. They're shared expectations that make crowded places feel surprisingly calm. Nobody announces them. Nobody explains them to newcomers. You simply observe, make the occasional mistake, apologize profusely, and gradually become part of the system yourself. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing queues as people wasting time and started seeing them as something much more interesting. They were proof that an entire society could run on trust between strangers who would probably never meet again. And once I understood that, a lot of other British habits suddenly became much easier to understand. But still, one time a British friend of mine once tasted a dessert I'd made and smiled before saying, "That's interesting." I walked away feeling oddly proud until another friend quietly explained that interesting wasn't exactly a compliment. Apparently, British English comes with an entire hidden dictionary that nobody hands to newcomers. Not bad can actually mean very good. Quite nice sometimes means just okay. We'll have to do that sometime. Doesn't necessarily mean anyone plans to schedule it. It's almost like the real conversation exists underneath the words themselves. Learning to hear what people actually meant instead of what they literally said became its own cultural education. At first, I assumed this indirectness meant people were being reserved or distant. Then I began seeing the psychology behind it. In many situations, softening criticism or avoiding blunt disagreement isn't about being dishonest. It's about preserving harmony. If two strangers can leave an interaction without embarrassment, that's considered a success. That explains why conversations often include extra, please, thank you, and sorry, even when they aren't strictly necessary. They're little verbal cushions that make everyday life gentler. Once I recognized that pattern, I stopped interpreting reserved behavior as unfriendly. It was simply another way of showing consideration. And then, of course, there's the weather. Before moving here, I thought the jokes were exaggerated. Surely an entire country couldn't spend this much time discussing clouds. Then I arrived. Within days, complete strangers were commenting on sunshine while waiting for buses, celebrating an afternoon without rain as though they had personally negotiated with the atmosphere, and somehow finding 3 different ways to describe drizzle. One morning I left home wearing sunglasses because the sky looked beautiful. By lunchtime, it was raining sideways. An hour later, the sun was back. By evening, I wasn't even surprised anymore. British weather has the personality of someone who changes weekend plans every 20 minutes. The fascinating thing is that weather conversations aren't really about weather. They're social shortcuts. Since the forecast changes so often, everyone experiences it together. Talking about it is safe, universal, and surprisingly effective at breaking the ice without invading anyone's personal space. In America, small talk often jumps quickly to jobs, hometowns, or weekend plans. In Britain, discussing the fact that it's somehow sunny and raining at exactly the same time accomplishes the same goal with far less pressure. It's a conversation starter that asks almost nothing of the other person while still creating a shared chi moment. Another place where my American assumptions completely fell apart was the local pub. Before I moved here, I pictured something similar to a sports bar back home. Televisions everywhere, loud music, and people mainly showing up to drink. My first visit couldn't have been more different. There were dogs asleep under tables, families eating Sunday lunch, a group of retirees debating a crossword puzzle, friends competing in a pub quiz with the seriousness of Olympic athletes. Someone was reading a book in the corner while another table celebrated a birthday. It didn't feel like a place built around alcohol. It felt like a neighborhood living room that just happened to serve beer. Historically, pubs have served as community gathering places for centuries, long before social media or even television existed. They were places where local news spread, friendships formed, business deals happened, and people simply spent time together. That history still lingers today. Of course, people go for a pint, but they're also there to catch up after work, celebrate milestones, or see familiar faces. Even the tradition of buying rounds reflects a subtle emphasis on generosity within a group. Instead of everyone paying separately throughout the evening, each person takes a turn treating everyone else. It's a small ritual, but it reinforces the idea that you're participating together rather than acting as separate customers. Living in London has made me appreciate something I didn't even realize I was missing before I arrived. Places where you're welcome to exist without a specific agenda. In an age where so much of life happens through screens, there's something comforting about neighborhoods that still revolve around shared spaces where people regularly bump into familiar faces. That's when I realized queues, quiet tube rides, endless apologies, weather conversations, and local pubs weren't isolated British quirks. They were all connected by the same invisible thread. Each one made living closely together just a little easier. And once I started seeing that pattern, I found myself slowly changing in ways I never expected. When I first arrived in London, I kept asking, why do British people do this? These days, I catch myself asking a different question. Why did I always assume my way was the obvious one? That's a much more interesting question because it doesn't just teach you about another country, it teaches you about yourself. Every culture hands us an invisible instruction manual while we're growing up. Most of us don't even realize we're carrying it until we move somewhere that follows a completely different edition. Suddenly, all those unwritten rules become visible, not because they're strange, but because they're no longer shared. So when people ask me whether Britain still feels weird, my answer is yes and no. The switched plugs are still a little funny. I still occasionally translate floor numbers in my head. I still smile every time an entire conversation somehow revolves around whether it's a bit chilly outside. But the weirdness has changed. It no longer feels confusing. It feels familiar, almost comforting. These aren't random quirks anymore. They're small pieces of a much bigger picture about how millions of people have learned to live alongside one another. I think that's the biggest lesson these past 2 years have given me. The greatest culture shock wasn't discovering that Britain had different habits. It was discovering that my own habits were never universal to begin with. Every country develops its own quiet logic, its own invisible rules, and its own definition of what everyday life should look like. Once you understand the reasons behind those choices, what once looked bizarre starts to feel surprisingly sensible. And maybe that's the real reward of living somewhere new. You don't just collect stories about another place. You come home with a wider understanding of what it means to be human. Because sometimes the most unfamiliar place you visit isn't another country at all. It's your own, seen through completely new eyes. If this video changed the way you see Britain even a little, subscribe, leave a like, and help hype the channel. There are so many more stories about life in London that I can't wait to share with you.